Look at that, I'm cooking on the front burner today, folks. Okay. I'm not absolutely certain I will hear if somebody on there pops up, but you probably will, Travis, so let me know. So, tell me how you feel about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I enjoyed it.
Good.
Surprisingly, I enjoyed it.
Good, I'm glad.
For the year it was written well.
Yeah, well, it's Victorian literature, so it sounds like Victorian literature. And that, Skylar, I figured you
I actually
like.
understood it quite
Yeah,
well.
Yeah, because you said you like that Victorian, that Jane Austen
Yes,
kind of feel,
yeah.
it has that, yeah. So let's start by talking about the idea of duality. Because this is something that this is a good concept for you to pair with other pieces of literature in order to make a paper out of. Duality is something that lots of authors have dealt with in a lot of different ways. And I think when we started this discussion and then truncated it, because most of us needed to read some more, we had gotten as far as the sort of king of dualism, good versus evil.
Mhm.
In this particular novel, what other dualities does Stevenson set up?
Okay, this actually came to my mind, but I don't know how to describe it. I feel like it was called like man versus, could you say like inner self? Because like he technically was like battling his inner feelings almost. 'Cause
What's wrong with man versus self?
Yeah, that'd be good.
I'm gonna star that one and come back to Sigmund Freud in a few minutes. What else?
There's something about nature. It said it, I just don't remember what it was.
Somebody at home wanna chime in? There are an awful lot of you for you to just sit there so quiet. See a sea of little red microphones.
See, most of what I think of is just stuff that falls into good versus evil or man versus self.
That's okay.
Because you have the selfless versus the selfish. and
Okay.
You have like
Yeah.
a lot of, yeah, I feel like it's just mainly falling into man versus self and good versus evil. It's just,
What about order versus chaos?
Thank you. Order versus chaos.
I would say that also falls into the author. The author's own inability to justify why he feels this way towards Mr. Hyde.
You mean the author or do you mean Edison?
The, yes, the narrator.
narrator.
Not the author, yeah.
The person who's perspective is in.
Expand on that a little bit, Mr. Brown.
Because, the narrator, specifically his disdain for, Mr. Hyde, while also stemming from his perception of him being bad, is also noted as being kind of, what's the word I'm thinking of? Unjustified. Like multiple times he describes him as, disabled, but you can't put a point on it. Just, his own, thoughts being organized and logical as opposed to the illogical feelings he, feels.
Mm-hmm. Which plays into what? Logic
Yeah.
versus,
Logic and emotion or feelings.
there you go. Yeah, that's a constant theme that runs through a lot of different, not only is that Jekyll and Hyde, but within Utterson, you're right, he says over and over again, I can't put my finger on it. And I can't accuse him of anything because I don't know, it's illogical the way I feel, and he doesn't like that. Even Lanyon says it.
Mm.
What's another duality between Jekyll and Hyde? I say it over and over again.
Could you do something with appearance
Yeah.
and like reality, cause like maybe appearance versus reality?
Ooh. I'm gonna start that one too.
I also had a thought between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was like how it's like the button self versus the let loose self.
Okay, the what self versus the let loose
It
self?
was button, like just straight white collar and making sure everything's prim and proper, and then Mr. Hyde allowed him to be more frivolous in what he chose to do. It was like he was purely based on desires versus just being just a stand-up person trying to do their best.
And when was the last time we talked about the concept of purely based on desire?
The Freudism.
Uh-huh, and what is pure, I just want what I want, and I don't care who it hurts?
Id.
Thank you. And what is the force of repression? Anybody remember?
The potion.
Oh, sorry, the force of oppression. I hate this thing.
Oh, oppression.
Yes. What oppresses the id?
Dr. Jekyll.
Mm-hmm. Who is the superego?
Really don't like Freud.
I know. But literature loves him.
Okay, he says some stuff that makes sense.
This little ego, superego, id thing is very useful triumvirate in literary analysis. And I don't think you can deny that it has some psychoanalytic value.
Yes.
It needed to be considerably refined. The way he used it was bad in most cases, but,
Could something be like maybe with pleasure?
okay.
I feel like he, at a point, he had like that pleasure and like that desires to like, almost like be different. You know what I'm saying? Like get out of that comfort shell that he was in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really know how I would put that there.
I think it has something to do with the Victorians, and you like Victorian literature.
No, that's why it's not coming to mind.
Society. Victorian society.
Society versus what?
Dr. Jekyll.
No, sorry, I hate this thing. Society versus what? What is the antithesis to society?
Mr. Hyde.
And if Jekyll values society,
Mm-hmm.
what does Hyde value?
Anarchy.
Oh,
Not bad.
what was it?
Anarchy.
You love that word.
But I think it's society versus self in this case. I'm not sure that anarchy isn't the same thing that's meant by chaos here.
Yeah.
Because even under, you still have society even under anarchy, you just don't have any rules in it.
I would say, even then, Mr. Hyde isn't really anarchy. He's just
Disorder.
acting on his own will.
Yeah, yeah.
He's just chaotic evil.
He is chaotic evil. As opposed to lawful good. Yeah. Sorry, Madison, what'd you say?
Disorder. You could say that instead of instead of anarchy, just disorder.
Yeah, order versus disorder.
He those societal norms or, yeah.
So, have I got enough? I do, okay.
Right here was one more word that stood out to me, it was about nature. I don't know why, but that kept coming back.
In terms of who?
It says the balance of my nature might be permanently overthrown. So I guess that was talking about Dr. Jekyll. and Mr.
Because
Hyde.
Dr. Jekyll has determined that his nature is good,
Yeah,
logical,
okay, so.
ordered.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Of course, the question is he right? Is that in fact his nature?
I read somewhere that like a big theme of it is like evolution, because around the same time Darwin's like book came out, and so like a big theme of it is like people were starting to contemplate the idea that people were just animals who pretended to be better than they really were. So it's probably something like the animal nature of man versus like morality that we ascribe to ourselves, even though we're really just animals.
That's very well put. Yeah.
And it describes him as ape-like, I'm pretty sure. In
Oh,
primitive.
repeatedly. Yeah, ape-like or like a monkey. He climbs the cabinet
called
like a
him-
monkey.
I think they called him like a troglodyte.
Yes, they do. That is a word that's actually used.
He's a troglodyte, because I know what it's meant, but what does it mean?
It's like it's a very primitive first world thinking. I first learned of the world of this word. I think it was like a 7th grade book we read. It was like about the school with smart kids and stuff like that. I can't remember what the book was named, but that was an insult hurled at somebody else.
I'm just Googling the definition now.
Be my guest. So, man versus beast is in there too,
What, the definition?
in the sense that man somehow is higher or better, right? But man is also more repressed.
Does that mean like
Deliberate,
Yes.
indifferent, or old-fashioned.
Repressed, contained, kept from fulfilling his own desires. And repression is a big theme in Victorian literature.
Well, I mean, they have a very structured, prim and proper way of doing things,
Yes.
especially in, Victorian England,
Very.
set norms and social standards.
We have company. Look at you.
How's that?
I need any seniors that haven't took pictures but have the money to pay for them.
I have already checked. All of mine have been photographed.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Broad. Okay. I've lost my train of thought. Bring me back.
you were talking about being like contained, repressed versus
Yeah.
Talking
free.
about how
You're talking
back
about
then
repression.
there was
Okay.
order.
Yeah. Victorian era.
So, I kind of want to move appearance versus reality over here. Because not every duality is purely good versus evil. It's not that simple. It's not completely dichotomous. And you can find those little cracks of, like, some qualities of Hyde are sort of necessary for society to function. And Stevenson sort of explores that, right? especially when you get into, Dr. Jekyll's, or is it Dr. Jekyll's? I suppose so. Dr. Jekyll's first person account, that long last chapter, right? What does Hyde do for him?
He goes and gets those powders and stuff, doesn't he?
Yes, in the plot, but what is Hyde's sort of purpose? In what ways? Why does he even want to be Hyde? It's not just because he wants to do evil, right? Why does he want it to begin with?
I'm not sure why he wants it, but I would say it helped Dr. Jekyll discover himself.
Nicely put, Miss Callahan. For those of you who didn't hear that, she said it helped Dr. Jekyll discover himself.
Cause like through the evil, through that contrast, he got to see, like, he made it known that Dr. Jekyll is definitely not Mr. Hyde. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Personality-wise.
Mm-hmm. But he has Mr. Hyde in him, right?
Yes.
Okay, this is a concept that you will come back to in literature from time to time. And depending on what you choose as your final novel, might be very useful for you. Do you know who Carl Jung is?
No.
No.
He's a psychologist you might like better than Sigmund Freud. He came later. He's useless from any sort of psychotherapeutic sense. But he talked a lot about the collective unconscious. Sort of those myths and archetypes and things that we all seem to have in common. Why do the same stories pop up everywhere, okay? And Jung talked about, so he talks a lot about human nature. And one of Jung's concepts is the integration of the shadow.
So like the opposite of self?
Yes.
Okay.
Not necessarily the opposite of self, but we all have characteristics we'd like to hide. The more you stuff them down, the harder it gets to find them, and you lose important qualities of
And
yourself.
he said in that last chapter, the more I tried to push Mr. Hyde away, the stronger the force was that he tried to come back.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about there. The more we repress qualities we think of as negative, and they're not necessarily always negative. For one thing, Hyde is younger.
Really?
Very much so.
What, in the
Hyde is a boy.
descriptions- In the descriptions, he said like a young, he kept saying like a young body,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
a stronger and like, in such sense.
Mm-hmm. Physically, he's younger, stronger, healthier. He moves more quickly and more lightly. Poole talks about the step is too light to be Dr. Jekyll because Dr. Jekyll trods the boards. Yep. So there's a lot of energy in Hyde. And that's what Jekyll is trying to get to when he lets Hyde loose. He's trying to get that youth and energy back.
Maybe that he missed or didn't, or maybe, like, I don't know, maybe like an underlying story of maybe he didn't even get to have that particular youth that he wanted.
You do kind of have that feel that he's kind of been so mature his entire life
Mhm.
that he never had a misspent youth. There's another way you can come at this story that could prove useful in comparison to other pieces of literature, and that's a very practical, what is he doing? Physically, what is he doing? How does he get to Hyde and how does he get away from Hyde?
Almost like a drug abuse
It
is what I
is.
called it as.
Yeah, there's a significant drug abuse metaphor here, or alcoholic metaphor here, if you wanted to look for it. depending on what kind of story or poem you wanted to compare it to. We'll read a poem, I hope, where the poet is talking about dancing with his father. And we'll come back to Dr. Jekyll, his alcoholic father.
Mm.
And we'll come back to Jekyll and Hyde when we talk about that. That there are qualities of that sort of inebriate character that we do think on fondly. I mean, you think about, it's Twyla's mother, right, the dancer?
Yep.
But she's considerably more charming than Roberta's. I mean, like, nobody really wants Roberta's mother.
Yeah.
And you could honestly draw a pretty clear comparison between this sort of Jekyll and Hyde characters and Roberta's mother and Twyla's mother, right? One of them's sort of wild and carefree and irresponsible, and the other one is repressed and... I mean, you don't get the feeling really that Dr. Jekyll is unpleasant, but he's certainly not a lot of fun.
I don't think either of them would be very fun, to be fair.
True. Well, neither would Hyde. And neither in real life is Twyla's mother. But you do have that feeling that, and you have that feeling in both these stories that if you could just put these people together, if you could integrate the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Because characters that are chaotic evil and characters that are lawful good are kind of equally ineffective. I mean, it's usually the ones in the middle who do the most good, who can kind of pick and choose.
Yeah.
One's constrained by their morals, the other is completely not.
Right. That's a very nice way of putting that, Jim, right? And of course, there's a question here, since we talked about Victorian repression, there's a question here of whether Jekyll is even constrained by his morals, or if he's just constrained by appearances.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we really don't find out if he's actually a good person, so much as he just cares so much that people think he's a good person. And in letting that go, he loses control of it. And maybe that's all it ever was. Maybe that's why it was easy to let go of. Maybe it was never a moral compunction at all. It was just making sure that people don't know what you're really like on the inside.
Like Emma said, you know, even though you may feel like on the inside.
Well, it's
Never
like,
mind, just to,
It's
he
okay.
He only ever really like denounces Hyde once the image of him is way worse than
Yes.
before when he murders someone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's not even that he's murdered someone. I mean, that's the thing. He knows the next day that Hyde has murdered someone, but it's when it comes out in the papers
Yep.
that it's a member of parliament. He's like, oh no.
Yeah, he
this
has that,
this is
yeah.
gonna destroy my life.
So it was the woman, right? That lived in the house? Didn't he kill her, or was it somebody outside?
No,
Yeah.
it's the one watching.
That was the woman
saw it.
watching, okay, and it was the other man that.
It's,
I
yeah,
don't
it's
Okay.
Sir Danvers.
I was confused on that part.
It's Sir Danvers Carew, who is, it says
Member of
MP,
Parliament.
that means member
Oh,
of parliament.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He's
that
a-
makes more sense now.
Yeah, MP is the way they say member, it's like we say congressman,
Mm-hmm.
which means,
The
Yeah.
same thing.
okay. I'm gonna spend about 30 seconds, so we don't run out of time, on that question of pronouns in the last, because we kind of touched on it already. In Jekyll's own narrative of his story, there in that last chapter, I would draw your attention to the fact that throughout that story, and what Stevenson does is really neat, throughout that story, he switches back and forth between referring to himself as I, and by the end is referring to both Jekyll and Hyde in the third person. So if I is not Hyde and it's not Jekyll, who is it?
Combination.
That's the beginning of that integration of the shadow. The I that begins to emerge through that story, when he stops, in the beginning, I is Dr. Jekyll.
Yes.
But as he moves through, he starts talking about Dr. Jekyll in the third person, the same way he talks about Mr. Hyde. That's that integration that you see. This novel pairs really well with Fight Club, where you see exactly the same thing happen. You see those characters come together.
Are we gonna talk about the nature of it, the landscape?
Yes, I do want to talk about the weather briefly, because it ties into the next thing that we're doing. Who is reading it electronically? Do you have it up in front of you?
Mhm.
Search for every incidence of the word fog.
Fog?
Fog.
There was one like right at the beginning of the second chapter. I'm pretty
Yes.
sure.
Press Control F and type in fog.
That's
Yeah.
there.
Really? You can
Yeah.
do that?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I
That's
didn't.
the wonderful thing about reading things on
It'll
Kindle or
tell
on
you how
screen.
many instances of it are on the top right.
And there should be like a little bar on the side where it pops up, where you can scroll down.
What, 10?
Wow.
Yeah, I got
That's
10
so
right here.
neat. Mr. Utterson, when he is, honestly, I think he was kind of snooping around, and then when he goes out in the day, when it was noon. And, no, I think he's he's hunting for, is he hunting for Mr. Hyde?
There is a point where he is hunting for Mr.
Because
Hyde.
it's the face of the
Fog
fog
is almost
seems
always
new.
associated with like mystery. Mystery or searching.
Yes.
Yes.
That-
Like,
Uncertain.
when the witness was in her room, it described what she was seeing.
Mhm.
A fog rolled over the city in the summer hours.
Which is, I feel like I say this about everything we read. Heavy-handed storytelling, but well done.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, on behalf of Robert Louis Stevenson, for acknowledging that this heavy-handed storytelling is at least well done.
Yes.
When,
It's all in the same chapter.
I don't think it's
It's all like-
all in the same chapter, but it's all in like the
It's
first.
all in the same section.
Well,
of
it's
the
like
book.
when you're watching
Yeah,
a
the
sad movie
incident
and
in
it
the
starts
window,
raining during the
it's
funeral.
in that.
It's,
We'll talk rain. Oh, we'll talk rain.
It even said like the
Go
fog
ahead.
of the season too.
I just said it was in the incident at the window. My literary thing, I was able to get it to pull up through the MacBook, and
Uh-huh.
like it's in book form, and it breaks it down by chapter. Well, like it said it was incident at the window.
Yes. There is a lot in Incident at the Window, but I don't think it's all there. There may be other forms. There may be foggy or
well, there's
fogged.
there's fog when he's describing Hyde crushing the kid.
Yes.
There's Hyde it's during the murder. It's during after the murder when he goes to Jekyll, I believe, because he said even the house was foggy.
And he
Yeah.
talks about
Yeah.
inside the lamps.
The foggy, is a cupola,
Mhm.
is that a lamp? Okay.
Well, it's like a tower. But even inside, the fog is seeping into the house even.
That's creepy.
And there is, one of my favorites is when he's hunting for, I think it's when he's hunting for Hyde.
with the
And it
officer,
Hmm?
with the officer.
And he talks about the fog being dirty
Yeah.
Yes.
and the fog, the filthy fog rolling in and
Very
obscuring
Victorian.
everything. Mhm.
Yeah, like the dingy street.
And you really have an association with Hyde and fog.
Yes. There should be a C in that word.
Yeah, close enough.
Whenever you see it, and fog is the heaviest handed of all the weathers, that's true. But whenever you see it, consider the fact that it's being used as a metaphor for obscurity.
But it's done well because at least it's in setting the mood.
Well, and
And
it's
also
set in
the set.
London.
Yeah,
I mean, in
exactly.
real life, London is foggy every night for a couple of seasons out of the year, so it doesn't feel out of place.
No.
I don't
Okay.
know if this has anything to do with it, but Was his house described like, did it ever describe the house as like, I feel like it described it like almost like dark, didn't it? Or,
His lab was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the lab is, and the house where Hyde, there on the side street,
mm-hmm.
the Hyde's
Yeah, that
house.
one.
Yeah, is particularly dark and scary, and nobody comes in and out of it, so the children have tagged it, and yeah, it's, yes.
The details in this story, like descriptions and details, were insane. Like I
Yeah.
had to really, really like go back and read because I would get lost in the details
Mhm.
and miss the plot and vice versa.
That's why I said I would listen to it at night and then read the pages the next day.
I
Because when
should've
you
done that.
listen to it, he emphasizes the plot, so it's easier to figure out what's going on.
Yes.
But you need the details, so you have to go back and read the pages. That, to me, that's the easiest way, the only way to read Victorian literature.
Yeah.
Even, my apologies, Jane Austen. I get tangled up in Jane Austen too. Okay, from here, we are going to Conrad Aiken's Silent Snow, Secret Snow,
What's that?
continuing our interest in weather and psychology. It's about a little boy, and I'll leave it at that.
Oh, that next reading?
Mhm.
Is it a short story?
Yes, it is a short story.
It's not as long as
Online,
this
I
one.
think it's about, I don't know, 9 or 10 pages. It's
Okay,
not
good.
super short, but it's not huge.
Is it something we've read before?
It's possible that you have read it. Sometimes it is used in, it's not a hard story to understand like the plot of. And sometimes it's used in earlier anthologies for synecdoche, which is when you use a part of a person to describe the whole person, or part of something to discuss the whole.
What era did it come from?
I believe it's the 40s or 50s,
So when
the
do you want us-
1940s or 50s, much more contemporary than Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
When do you want us to have that read by?
Has it, check and see if it didn't drop this morning. It should, I think it dropped at 9 AM.
I think I saw it, not mistaken.
It's on there, but there's no due date.
I haven't set the assignment to drop yet then. I believe I have it set for you to read today and write tomorrow, and tomorrow night you have a response paper.
Tomorrow?
Wait, it's on the.
Yeah. It's just a response paper. It's just like a page and a half.
So,
And we've talked about half of it, and we'll talk about Silent Snow, Secret Snow tomorrow.
so
Oh,
read
okay,
Silent
got it.
Snow Secret, that is a mouthful.
Silent Snow, Secret Snow.
So read that tonight.
Yes.
Oh, we're writing a response under this?
We're writing a response over both of them together.
Oh,
We
okay.
will talk about the weather and other considerations in Silent Snow, Secret Snow tomorrow.
I will say Frankenstein's
That's
more
right.
enjoyable than Resuscitate in my opinion.
Really?
Resuscitate was short but sweet, but it's just not my type of literature.
You have a good day.
Well, I mean, that's
You
what it's
too.
for